Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you just for the great work that you do. I guess I'll have questions that any of you can answer, but I know some of it will be specific to your particular areas. One of the big things that you've identified in your reports is the $141 billion over 9 agencies in improper payments. I mean, this seems like low-hanging fruit, and yet that is an enormous dollar amount when we think about it. And oftentimes, as we're looking to, not balance the budget each year, this is something that would make a significant headway in that. And so how do we get at that? I mean, we identify it, we know it, we've identified the dollar amounts, we know the 9 agency offenders. How do we stop it?
Let me tell you some of the challenges we faced at DOJ OIG, and I think my colleagues have faced as well, which is in an era of big data, what we're learning, as many of us are doing data analytics work to try and get at those issues, is our agencies don't keep good data, or no data at all. As an example, we went to see about healthcare fraud questions at the Justice Department. Justice Department spends over $1 billion a year on inmate health care. We went to the 121 or so institutions to get their electronic medical records to look for anomalies in payment patterns, and we learned that about 100 of those 121 actually still have paper records. And so we issued a report to the Department, it's public, expressing our concern about that. And they have issued now a request to seek to turn all of those into electronic records. But those are challenges we're seeing over and over again. And the government needs good data. The committee is to be recognized for passing the Data Act, which hopefully moves us towards better data.
Hopefully they can pay for it with the recoup of who they're not improperly paying rather than asking for additional appropriation.
Yeah, if I could add, I agree with that. I agree with Michael Horowitz's comments. I think there are sort of 3 things that need to be done. One, there has to be adequate internal controls so that the money doesn't go out the door inappropriately. We've seen that in healthcare and DOD, right. Compounding pharmacy money, billions of dollars going out because there's not good internal controls. 2, when we find that, people ought to be held accountable for this. So there needs to be some deterrent. It just doesn't move on. And the third thing is data analytics. We need to do a better job and have more capacity to analyze the massive amounts of data within the DOD and the entire federal government to root out indicators of fraud to provide the leads that we can go after.
Yeah. Ms. Lerner.
I would just make one final point. A lot of the improper payment work that OIGs do is driven by risk assessments that agencies are supposed to perform. And I think sometimes you need a culture change within the agency for it to be acceptable for them to acknowledge that risk exists, because without that, the quality of the risk assessment isn't going to be strong. And without a strong risk assessment, your ability to identify and fight those improper payments is undermined.
Thank you for that. And with my remaining time, I'll just hit the last 3 areas, and whoever wants to comment on it. A payment to grantee verification. This is another big thing that I know all of you are concerned about. With $700 billion of grants issued each year, this is an enormous amount of the American people's working capital that is sent to Washington, and yet oftentimes we have problems of knowing who's identifying the grants. And then you stood up the Disaster Assistance Working Group on your own initiative, which I applaud you for, because we appropriated $26.1 billion that went out in disaster assistance. Obviously, all the hurricanes, fires, and floods, only the United States could weather something so enormous. But I'm glad that you've stood that up for that oversight. And then the last item is the overseas contingencies in Afghanistan, Syria, and Asia. Oftentimes we've joked Afghanistan is the biggest black hole of waste in the Department of Defense. And so those are the 3 other areas, if any of you care to comment.
Sorry, in terms of grant expenditures, again, I'll repeat what Mr. Fine said, analytics, analytics, analytics. It helps us when grant funds are expended. It would be wonderful to be able to, in situations where there are disasters, to have them set up so that we can catch things even earlier.
Let me just touch on the Disaster Assistance Working Group issue. It is something that's very important to us. One of the things that we're trying to do in DHS, OIG is the lead on that. work closely with GAO so that we're coordinated with each other, as well as state and local oversight entities. There are state auditors, there are state IGs involved in some of the hurricane relief locations. We want to make sure we're well coordinated with each other. We want to share information. We don't want to duplicate effort, and that's one of the things I know we've all been doing, SIGI, IGs with GAO, to make sure we're coordinated on our oversight. But one of the things we've also done, I just want to mention, in connection with oversight.gov, try to replicate what the IG community did with the Recovery Act funds in 2009, which is create a page on the oversight.gov website so the public can see what we're finding and what we're seeing. One of the issues we've come to Congress for in FY18, and we didn't get funding, but we're looking for in FY19, is a very modest amount of money, $1 to $2 million, to build out oversight.gov, and that's one of the things we'd like to build out further, is that webpage. And so while Congress appropriated the $26+ billion, what we're looking for is some additional funds to allow the transparency to occur around that spending.
If I could address the overseas contingency operation issue, yes, Afghanistan is a source of a lot of money and a lot of waste, and both we and the Special IG for Afghanistan Reconstruction have issued reports on that. There needs to be better internal controls. There needs to be consequences for the waste when it's exposed. There are bilateral financial commitment letters that are signed, but they often don't have any consequences and are often waived. I was there recently, met with the commanders, the diplomatic personnel, as well as Afghan officials, including President Ghani. They seem committed to internal controls and reform, but it's too early to say whether it will have any impact. There is a massive amount of money that goes there, and a lot of it is wasted.
And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.